それではお時間となりましたので、
Thank you very much for waiting. Now it's time to restart. We'd like to start the next panel, Path to Human-Centered Responsible AI Development, GPAI launch and its role.
まずはじめに
First
パ
of
ネ
all,
リストの皆様をご紹
I'd
介
like
し
to
たいと思い
introduce the
ます。
panelists.
セミア暫定事務局長ジャック・ラジョット様です。
Jack Rajot, Interim Director General of AISUM2020 He is joining remotely.
国
Next,
立情報学自動制御研究所理事
Bertrand
ベルトラン・ブロ
Ron
ンシュベル
Schubeg,
様です。
Director
ブロ
of
ンシュベル様もリモートでのご参加となり
INIA.
ます。
He is also participating remotely.
続きまして総務省
Next,
国際戦略局
Yoichi
総合研究
Ida,
飯田
Director of
洋一様です。
International Research and Policy Coordination, Ministry of Internal Affairs and Communications.
続きまして、
Next,
経産省
Takuya Izumi, Information Economy Division of Commerce and Information Policy Bureau, Ministry of Economy, Trade and
泉
Industry.
様はリモートでのご参加となります。
He is also joining remotely.
最後にモデレーターを務
Finally,
め
the
ますのは
moderator
日本経済
is
新聞社
Yasuhiko
編
Ota,
集委員兼
Senior
編集員
Staff Writer
太田
of
康彦です。
Nikkei.
よろしくお願いします。さて、それではここからの進行は
From now on, I'd like to hand over to Mr.
お
Ota.
願いします。
Please.
ありがとうございます。
Well, thank you very much.
今日はですね、
Today,
GPAI、GPAI、
GPAI or GPAI, as they call it,
AI という技術を
AI is a technology, and in what way can we share it
価値観で
all over the world? Can we have the same value? How can we control it globally? First of all, there are 4 panelists.
それぞれ簡単な自己紹介を
So I would like to ask each of them to introduce themselves very briefly. So first of all, I'd like to turn to someone from Montreal, same as Secretary or Director General Jack Rajot.
自己紹介してください。
Please, could you please introduce yourself?
Yes, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for having me as part of this important panel. My name is Jacques Rajot. I'm the Executive Director of the International Center of Expertise in Montreal for the Advancement of AI. I joined the organization very recently in June at the time of the launch of the GPAI, the Global Partnership on AI. In terms of background, my first career was as a corporate lawyer, and the last 15 years I've been directly involved in international development, mainly building partnership between private sector and the civil society, and it's a pleasure for me to participate in this panel. Thank you.
ありがとうございます。パリからは、国立情報学研究所
From Paris, we have Mr. Bertrand Branchwit from India, of Paris. Please introduce yourself.
Yes, good afternoon, good evening, and good night for my colleague and friend Jacques, for whom it is 4 o'clock in the morning. I work for INRIA, which is the French National Research Institute on Computer Science and Applied Mathematics. And INRIA was given the responsibility to support the Center of Expertise of Paris for the GPAI. And so I am at the moment a director of this Center of Expertise. My background is in computer science. I am engineer, PhD, and habilitation in AI. And I've been working in AI for many years. And I've been also head of 2 INRIA research centers. So I would say that I'm also a specialist in the domain. Thank you.
ありがとうございます。カナダとフランスはこの GPAI のプロジェクトの
So from France and Canada, these are 2 countries that have led the GPAI effort from the very beginning. So I think we have the most outstanding panelists. So from Japan, we have 2 panelists. Ida-san, you are from the MIC. Thank you very much. This is Ida from MIC. In 1988, I entered the Ministry of Post and Telecommunication. And now I am Director of International Research and Policy Coordination at the MIC. I am in charge of multinational relations in this area. In 2016, G7, I served as a working group chair for the G7 meeting. Last year, when G20 was held at the Tsukuba, the digital ministers meeting, I served as the chair of the working group. I have been working in AI for a very long time, so I hope that I can introduce what I've done so far.
泉さんは経済産業省から
泉さん、you are from METI?
情報政策の企画調査
I understand that you are the Commerce and Information Policy Bureau position. So please introduce yourself. Thank you very much for this introduction. I'm very happy to participate in this panel. My name is Takeo Izumi at METI. I am at the Information Economy Division Commerce and Information Policy Bureau. Specifically, what I'm doing, AI as well as Japan and EU digital cooperation are the areas that I'm involved in. In terms of AI, let me also mention that 2016 to 2019, both in summers, I was at Silicon Valley. So I've been involved in research of trends at Silicon Valley as well. Now, before coming here, I was at the Japan Patent Office, and at that time, the image diagnosis system, AI-related patent is the area that I've been working in. So I hope I can make my contribution from different perspectives. Thank you.
ありがとうございます。早速パネル討論に入りたいと思うんですが、そもそも
Thank you very much. Now, without further ado, I'd like to start the panel discussion. So what is GPAI in the first place? It's a global partnership for AI.
そうですね、ブランシュペクさんからスライドを見せて
So,
いただき
Branch
ながら
Beck-san,
そもそもこの GPAI
I think it is good that if you could explain to us using your slides what exactly GPAI does.
So yes, thank you. So the idea, in fact, we developed the idea for a number of years, and this will also be reminded by our colleague Ida from Japan. It's the idea of putting together experts from different stakeholders, so scientists, business specialists, civil society representatives, government people, international organizations people, in order to look at what AI is doing to the world at the moment, and to gather what we call like-minded partners, like-minded countries, to look at AI as a whole and to make it act for the better of humanity. So the principles are, that it is based on expertise. So we have experts. We have 150 experts in the different working groups at the moment, and we probably will have a few more in the near future. It's cross-sectoral and multi-stakeholder, as I said. We have people representing different parts of the society. It's project-oriented, so we don't want only to put recommendations. We also want to that these recommendations are based on facts, so we will really facilitate the development of projects for the GPAI. When I was talking about like-minded countries, so we all agree to fulfill the principles contained in the OECD recommendation on AI, the OECD principles, and we also aim at acting towards the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. So all the countries, all the members of GPAI are adhering to these goals. And of course, there's already a lot of work being done internationally about AI. We have many initiatives. So we want to build on this existing work. We are not going to do the same once more. We are going to build on existing work and we hope that with the support from the member states and the recommendations will have an impact on our world. In terms of members, so we have 3 members in North America, Canada, USA, and Mexico. We have 5 country members in Europe, plus the European Union itself. We have 4 partners in Asia, including, of course, Japan, who is a very important partner in this initiative. and 2 partners in Oceania, New Zealand, and Australia. And in fact, since this was announced and launched last June, so we are a recent organization, even though the discussion started some time ago, a number of other countries declared their intention to join us. So very probably there will be a number of new members in the next months or so. So in 2021, we will probably have more members than the 15 current members. In terms of organization, so we have the top level of GPAI is the GPAI Council, which is composed of ministers or deputy ministers. So this is a big decision-making body. A steering committee, which is mixing government representative and experts, is going to operate and make the decisions concrete. And the experts are grouped in what we call the multi-stakeholder experts group plenary. The first plenary will be organized by our colleagues from Canada in December, early December. And the work is done in working groups. So at the moment, we have 4 main working groups plus a subgroup. But I want to say that the experts in the subgroups are not sub-experts, so they are real experts. So in fact, we have 3 groups which are supported by the Center of Expertise of Montreal in Canada, the working group on responsible AI, the working group on data governance, and the subgroup on the pandemic response. And 2 groups are supported by our center, the Paris Center of Expertise, which is, as I said, operated by INRIA. It's the group on the future of work and the group on innovation and commercialization. In addition to this, we have a close link with the OECD because the GPAI Secretariat is hosted and operated by the OECD to make sure that we are really in complementary actions that the OECD is taking itself. The main bodies, the Council and the Steering Committee, they will really start their work at the first plenary that will take place in December. Thank you, and I will stop sharing my screen.
ありがとうございます。
Okay.
飯田さんに
Thank you very much. Now I'd like to turn to Mr. Ida. So from the very beginning, GPAI formation is something that you've been involved all along. So the OECD, G7, G20. So how did it come about? How did the Japanese government start getting involved? Well, thank you very much for that question. Yes, in the beginning, related to AI, international rulemaking is necessary, so discussion was needed. I think that was the starting point for the discussion. So I think you've brought some slides, so would it be possible for you to share them? Yes, so I would like to talk about the process that the Japanese government has gone through. So in 2016, the Japanese government was the chair of G7, and at the time, internationally, for the first time, about AI principles, fully-fledged international discussion was necessary. That was proposed by the Japanese government. And there are 3 backgrounds to this. First of all, at the time, even now, the third AI boom was taking place. And at the time, a singularity was often discussed, a loss of employment. So there were many negative topics which were gaining traction. And many people were afraid of the AI impacts. And against such a backdrop, we wanted to emphasize that AI brings about happiness for people, or we have to develop AI in such a way to make people happy. So internationally speaking, necessary rulemaking has to be discussed, and that's why we made a proposal. And the second point is that despite this, in reality, AI is even now, I think we are still in this kind of stage. It is still nascent. I think it is just starting. So going forward, we have to have many kinds of innovation. So if we have excessive regulation in place, then we may kill innovation. That has to be avoided by all means. So free and innovative environment has to be maintained. So risk may manifest itself in some areas, and regulations may be put in place. So before that, we have to take kind of a soft or a relaxed approach in terms of regulation, but at the same time, we need to have a good governance exercised. And the third point is that AI through the internet is connecting things internationally, and ecosystem itself is global. It is becoming a global. That was clear from the beginning. So rule making and environment making, international discussion is needed. So in 2016, G7 took place and we made a proposal, and G7 took up this proposal, started saying that we should continue discussion in the following year in Italy, and in 2018 in Canada, while the presidency of G7 and AI discussion continued. Through this process, human-centric values, and to that end, necessary requirements, a discussion has been continuing. And in 2018 in Canada, and in the following year, G7 presidency was France, and they came up with some prototype ideas for GPAI, as I understand. So in 2018, in Biarritz, the G7 France took place, and we wanted to reach an agreement back then, but GPAI wasn't formed yet. At that timing, we couldn't reach consensus or agreement. But after that, France and Canada, in a very tenacious manner, continued the discussion. And at some point, some countries were a bit hesitant. They weren't sure that this could really happen, but it was supported by the US strongly this year, and in June, GPAI was shaped and established. At the same time, Japan, in 2016, we made a proposal, and G7 discussion started taking place, and along with it, the OECD discussion was also proposed by Japan, which started ongoing in parallel. G7 and G20 are revolving chairmanship, so the chair changes every year. That is good that we can introduce many viewpoints, but continuity of discussion and accumulation of our knowledge is sometimes difficult because of this rotating presidency. So international organizations with in-depth knowledge should be involved, and that's why we started engaging the OECD. And from Japan, experts, academics, and officers were dispatched, and they were also involved in the discussion proactively. And last year, in 2019, at the G20 and at the OECD, agreement was reached. And over the past 2 to 3 years, common international understanding has been somewhat clarified, and one of them is that the use of AI has to be human-centric. It has to be based on democratic values. It has to be reliable. It has to win understanding and trust of people. That's one point. And the second point is that many people have to use it with peace of mind. And that means everybody has to be involved in discussion. They have to be convinced. To that end, in digital world, we call it multi-stakeholder. All stakeholders have to be engaged in discussion. All of them have to have participation to make decisions. That's the second point. And then, through the process of a series of discussions, as was mentioned earlier, the potential of innovation shouldn't be lost. So excessive regulation should be avoided as much as possible. It should be open, and it should be conducive to innovation. These are the 3 important points which we wanted to include in the agreement. And in 2019, the OECD and G20 principles were shaped. So these G20 AI principles say that to realize reliable AI, this is really OECD recommendation, but something very similar to this was agreed at G20 Osaka, and it was adopted. So this is non-binding and autonomous rules. Innovation potential shouldn't be lost, and people's trust in AI should improve. And to do so, there is a section 1, there are 5 points. Underneath, inclusive growth, well-being, fairness, transparency, explainability, accountability, safety and security. All these are components mentioned, and AI has to satisfy all these conditions, and we have to make such development. So this is like a soft law that we agreed on. So if you look at this today, this is quite abstract. Having said that, at the very beginning, Japan came up with this and started promoting AI innovation so that everybody can be happy in the AI society. Well, actually, in Japan, we have this concept of Society 5.0, which we are promoting. And globally, we would like to replicate this. It's such a principle. So going forward, this is an abstract level today, but it should be substantiated. It should become more specific. And we need to realize this. It's an important mission for us. So with that in mind, GPAI really sees these OECD principles as a common philosophy. There are 15 member states and regions, and based upon these principles, AI should be developed and used for democracy. AI should be developed. And how can we do that? That is the question, and international multi-stakeholder joint effort can be promoted in this framework. So Japan, going forward, would like to keep working with France and Canada actively. And at the beginning, we had this ideal vision, and we want to realize that vision. So we want to make contribution. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ida. And now I'd like to ask the following question to Mr. Lajot. As already mentioned, it's a gradual collaborative scheme that has been established, and principles have been made clear. What should GPAI do going forward? What is going to be the challenge for GPAI going forward? What is your view, Mr. Lajot?
Thank you very much. And I would like to build on what Bertrand and Mr. Ida just mentioned. And I think that the strength or the ambition of the GPAI are also some of the challenges that we will be facing as the initial, as part of the initial launch of an organization with such ambition. But the first thing, as Bertrand mentioned, it's really the intention behind the GPAI is really to be the bridge between research and applied AI. So by definition, we are moving into a project-oriented content, it requires project structuring, it requires project coordination. And I think that those that designed the structure of the GPAI had that in mind when they created both the Paris Center as well as the Montreal Center. So supporting the group of experts to have the knowledge, but bringing the capacity of these two centers to do the project structuring and the project coordination makes it possible to move from this research to the applied AI concept. The second element is obviously the clear intention behind the GPAI through the composition of the group of experts to establish a true collaboration between, or cross-sector collaboration between academia, civil society, and industry. And that's probably easier said than done, because all of these three sectors are extremely rich in terms of knowledge, expertise, but to really put them together through an applied AI approach to actually implement projects is something that yet, there are some very good examples of true collaboration between private sector, civil society, and academia. But I think it requires a specific approach to be able to really to make these three sectors work together. We normally have a tendency to work more in silo or in parallel than work in true collaboration. And as I mentioned in my personal introduction, I had the privilege over the last few years to work very closely with international organizations who had exactly that as in their main focus, which is to create this true collaboration. And I think this will allow us, for instance, to bring not only human in the loop, but also society in the loop in terms of approach. The third one, I think, which is also clearly stated in the mission of the GPAI, is to be inclusive of developing and emerging countries. I think that we all know that there are amazing opportunities through the development of AI, but there are also risk that needs to be addressed. Specific, one of them being, to increase, or the risk of increasing the digital divide between developed countries and developing countries. So I think that the object, as we are designing this project, we need to make sure that we are doing it in full collaboration with representative of emerging and developing countries. And as Bertrand mentioned, there is a planned expansion of the GPAI. We have the GPAI task force has received expression of interest of countries who would like to join the organization. And I think these countries, part of these new members will include additional countries who are considered developing or emerging countries. So I think that this element is quite important to keep in mind. So these are I would say the three main opportunities as well as challenges of the GPAI as we move forward and try to deliver more evidence for the sector for the advancement of AI in society.
ラジオットさんありがとうございます。泉さんに伺いたいです。
Thank you very much. I have a question for Mr. Izumi. We now have the framework of GPAI, and we are now moving forward. As individual policy for each country, it has to be applied and put into implementation. What about in the case of Japan? You are from MEDI. Do you think that what is the significance of GPAI from the Japan's perspective? How can Japan utilize what is being laid down by GPAI? Thank you very much. I think the question is a policy-related question. In terms of public sectors of government, the tool we have is rule-making ability, and also to allocate the resources to R&D areas where risk-taking is difficult. R&D funding can be provided. And the third area is providing information. In the context of GPAI, norm formulation and R&D project is considered. But I think, as Jack has mentioned, knowledge sharing is very important because there are so many experts. Information sharing is very important. In particular, sharing of best practice is where an important function can be played. There are also other values of GPAI, but it is close to business after all. And best practice sharing is very appropriate, especially involving multi-stakeholders, people from different backgrounds coming together to analyze best practices where value can be generated. And as Mr. Ida has mentioned today, so far, international discourse and AI principles have been subject to discussions in terms of its values. But going forward, it is important to go to the deployment phase. A specific deployment is called for. GPAI is a theory and practice, and bridging the two is an important focus of GPAI. What is going to be important is the best practice revealing each nation should be identified. For example, in order to utilize AI at the government level and company level, what are the practices that are taking place? And in terms of data sharing, what countries are doing? This type of information should be collected, and AI expert should be responsible for communicating the result of analysis. Japan would be happy to have other countries share best practice to put into practice, but it's not. We want to go beyond that. We also have initiatives in Japan. We hope that through GPAI we can communicate the results we have achieved in Japan. So ultimately, we can share values globally. Not just limited to the GPAI members. I hope that it will expand further so that international business environment can also benefit. That is my expectation. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. So I have been listening to some presentations about GPAI, and I have some simple questions. So I'd like to address these questions to you so that you can share your ideas. So I've prepared some simple questions, but I think it may be a good idea to mix them all. So first of all, AI is a technology. There are all sorts of leading edge technology, but I think AI is such a unique technology, as was mentioned in the previous session. It's about human intelligence. So human intelligence can be expanded. So ethical values and democratic principles have to be included. All sorts of social norms and values have to be considered as well, how to leverage this in the real society. Mr. Izumi talked about this a little bit. So the technology and society, the relationship is an important theme here. So GPAI has had all sorts of discussions, coming up with recommendations. But if you just say them, it's not very helpful. So you have a discussion, and after that, who should realize it? Is it the government? Is it businesses? Is it users? So what sort of a mechanism or system will be useful to make it functional? So first of all, I'd like to turn to Mr. Braunschweig. Could you please share your thoughts?
Yes, thank you. I think it's the movement towards AI is the result of a generic movement of digitalization of our society as a whole. Now, this was not the case in the past. If you look back 20, 30 years, then you will see that information technology was used by everyone to provide data, to make information available, but that was more or less about it. Now, with AI, systems are able to make predictions and to make prescriptions, that is, to take decisions about the world. And this is really an important factor. So now we are, and this is true for AI, it's also true for a number of other technologies, but it's even more true for AI because we talk about decisions that require human intelligence normally. And so this is why it's so important at the moment. The society as a whole did not realize some time ago that information technology and AI was going to have such an impact, but now it does. Now it does for every activity. We are all relying on digital technology, and we will be more and more relying on AI-powered devices, AI-powered systems. And so this is why we need to think about how we are going to deal with these new elements. And because decisions and prescriptions can be good, they can be also not so good, errors can happen, and we have to look at the possible consequences. So this is why there is a big movement now worldwide towards looking at the consequences of this omnipresence of AI in our activities. Now, in terms of we said that we will base our recommendations on real projects, on experimentations, and also on the knowledge of our 150 experts, of course. And now, who is going to put these recommendations into actions? We believe, and our member states believe, that since we have the support from these 15 member states and probably even more, we have the support from multi-stakeholder groups of people who are quite knowledgeable and respectable. Then what we will produce will have a chance to be developed by the governments, by industry, by other activity, by people in general. But it still has to be demonstrated because we are just at the beginning. We haven't produced any recommendation yet. So we have the first plenary in 1.5 months, and it will be just the start of a long story. But we think that with the support that we have around us, and with the support of experimentation and real applications, what we think, what we say, what we recommend has a chance to be developed for the good of everyone.
Thank you very much. I'd like to ask a question to Mr. Rajot. So I wondered, Rajot-san, you are a key person along with Braunschweig-san, and both of you are from French-speaking regions. And looking at the countries that are participating. I think this is a kind of a European-led organization. So as Mr. Brunswick said, you have to create shared values. Such a discussion is taking place. But is it really possible to come up with something common or universal? Because each country has different traditions, religions, cultures, and so forth. So if you deepen that sort of a discussion, is it really possible to create a platform that is a universal covering all over the world? I'm a little bit skeptical about that, but what would you say? Can I turn to Mr. Rajot? These common values or universal values or norms, what sort of a view do you have?
Yeah, thank you very much for the discussion. I think it could be the topic of a full panel or conversation about what brings the world together versus what divides the world. But we had these conversations actually between colleagues and with experts a few weeks ago, and I think that generally speaking, there are more, especially in the context of scientific development of AI, looking at the potential of AI to solve some of the most pressing issues around the world, that there are more common grounds than there are dividing elements between nations when it comes to addressing some of the most pressing issues. Obviously, we have to take into account, especially when it comes to data analysis, all the biases that could be built in databases. But I think that the sector is generally quite sensitive to those elements, and everybody is working, keeping in mind the risk of biases in the database. But I think also when we look at the potential of AI, I think there are the potential, but also the risk of AI, that AI might have on our society. There are two ways to look at that from a philosophical point of view. One is focusing on the risk and trying to close down and put barriers and parameters to avoid those risks. And the other option also is to be more expensive and looking more at the opportunities that offer that, keeping in mind some of the element of risk and managing them through the process of actually creating value for our society. And I think that the philosophy behind the thinking behind the creation of GPAI, especially through the cross-sector collaboration, is more about opening up with a high level of consciousness around the risk that is associated with it. But also, since we will be moving from a pure research environment to an applied AI environment, I think that's where the knowledge and the expertise of civil society, industry, and academia comes together and really have the opportunity to create projects that will both create value at the society level, but also keep in mind some of those elements of risk and try to manage them through a practical application. So I'm quite confident in the human being, generally speaking. And I think that we have an amazing tool that is here to be able to help us serve address some of the most pressing issues. And I'm confident that through the difference of culture and values and political views, that there are ways in which we can bring all of these international experts. And as I mentioned also before, first, we have countries that have joined us. It's not, I understand your comment at the early stage of GPAI about, having a lot of the members who are from, Europe or North America. But I think we need to keep in mind, we have India, we have Asian countries also as are part of our organization. And we have also a country in Latin America. And, as Bertrand mentioned at the very beginning, it's likely to be expanding over the coming year. So I think it's all positive in terms of the potential of GPAI to be representative of diverse views and values.
ありがとうございます。飯田さんに聞き
Well,
ます。
thank you very much. Now I'd like to turn to Mr. Ida. So COVID-19 has been expanding globally, and as Jackson has said, trusting people was mentioned, but this is a challenge against the human beings. When looking at the responses by various countries, I think different countries are making different responses. So individual dignity, that is a European value, and protection of personal information is heavily protected. in Europe and so on. So monitoring is quite difficult. Surveillance is difficult. China is not a democracy. So individual information, private information is not well protected. But China leveraged AI so much and it was able to contain coronavirus, at least it seems. So this COVID-19 is posing a question to us. The way AI should be is being questioned. So COVID-19 response is different by different countries, and Japanese response is also unique. So what is your view on this?
Thank you very much for the very difficult question. What I'm going to answer now is not from the point of view of MIC or Japanese government. This is my personal view that I would like to share with you. Based on that understanding, let me speak on this topic. As you have rightly mentioned, beset with COVID-19, the response differed from country to country, and it was quite amazing that there was such a difference, especially for tracking the. And in the OECD, Digital Economic Committee Chair is also my role. And in this meeting, we discussed this topic. Just because it's emergency, going beyond the rules in terms of personal information was also discussed. Because there was such a panic, and because some countries were doing so well, the prevailing view was that we should be able to use the personal information. But after coming down, the personal information as well as human rights should not be undermined. COVID-19 is a major issue, but it is only one of the major crises besetting us. So taking that in, we should not do away with everything just to overcome COVID-19. We don't want to live in a world where this will become the norm. That has become the prevailing view thereafter. In the OECD is a group of countries that are democratic. Therefore, after coming down, everyone said that even if we're dealing with COVID-19, we should not undermine the protection of personal information or the protection of human rights just for the purpose of fighting the virus. We are not saying that we should give up, but other means should be contemplated. So to deal with human rights and personal information protection is not the way forward to fight with the virus. In some of the meetings, the CTEC meeting of OECD, as the chair, we had discussed privacy protection as well as security as well as human rights protection. Over decades, democracies have established this rule in this area, and it has to be respected, even beset with the COVID-19. We don't know what is going to happen going forward. Is it going to be with Corona or is it going to be post-Corona? But we have to make sure that we should be able to protect privacy as well as human rights. That is the reason why, even beset with the COVID-19, we should not make a mistake. This is a very important message that I try to advocate. Half of this is my personal view. And as the chair of the OECD committee, I believe it is extremely important. The fundamental values must be maintained in making efforts to overcome crisis. And this, by the same token, it is true for AI as well. Principles must be adhered to, and we have to be able to work within these rules. Thank you very much, Izumi-san. Companies are the manufacturers as well as the users of AI. Government is likely to use this, but the main users of AI are the companies, and they are competing under the market mechanism. And there is also competition in developing AI as well as in the application of AI. Companies are in competition, so a market mechanism could be one force to drive the development of AI. But on the part of the government as well as GPAI, I think good guidance must be provided to companies in this regard. Ismail-san, you're serving as a bridge between the government and the corporates. How can market mechanism be adapted to AI? The type of competition which is appropriate for the AI development is what I would like you to comment on. Thank you for your question. Ultimately, GPAI is trying to provide information on best practice. Because ultimately, companies and through products and service, it is important that consumers benefit. This is the ultimate goal. In this regard, the ethical aspect as well as the social values relating to AI and the corporate pursuit of profit could seem like there is a disconnect. But as already mentioned today, if there is trust in using AI, and the trust could be evaluated as a token, for example. If we can create such a mechanism for a government as well as GPAI, I think that would be an important objective to achieve. AI principles, the formulation thereof, is showing one kind of goal. Now, there could be additional need for transparency or accountability. And when we try to drive everyone toward one goal, what kind of support can be provided? How can the process be facilitated? And how this will be supported by the market is what we have to achieve. And the government should play a role in this regard. As mentioned in the previous panel discussion, governance innovation are very important as well. Companies must also participate in the rule-making process as well. In the previous session, this was discussed. On the part of the companies, looking at the best practice offered by GPAI, in order to gain trust, companies should work with government to be involved in the rule-making process, as well as formulation of guidelines, so that better improvement can be made. I think this is ideal. I know that the industry and their environment is very difficult, but I believe that GPAI involves multi-stakeholders, and there is sharing of different values. It's a group of experts. Therefore, the information communicated from GPAI is going to be an important building block for this process going forward. Thank you very much. We only have several minutes left in this panel discussion. So I would like to ask Mr. Rajat and Mr. Branchbeck, respectively, about the following question. I am concerned about Russia and China. Because we belong to the Western side, and I think we share values, and I think the GPAI principles can receive support from these countries. But there are countries in the world, regions in the world that do not share the same values. When we face countries that do not share the same values, how can dialogue take place with GPAI? For GPAI activities to lead to stability in the world, in the geopolitical sense, what should be the positioning of the GPAI? Can we have your comments? 1 minute each, please. Mr. Brunswick, please.
Yes, I just want to remind that, in fact, the GPAI organization is open to all countries which are adhering to this value that we are talking about. And so if these countries decide that they adhere to the value, then they will be welcome to participate in the groups. So that would be really the best. In fact, if you look at China, for example, China has published what they call the Beijing AI principles. Many of them are aligned with what we say, with what we feel. So maybe the difference is not that big. I'm not sure about Russia. I'm not sure if Russia has published anything regarding the AI principles. I would have to check. But there are so many organizations and countries and initiatives that published their adhesion to different principles, but it might exist. I'm not so sure. So I hope that in the future there will be some kind of global movement toward what we say, and maybe we are the precursors of a global arrangement, of a global thought on the consequences of AI. I think it's also important to take into account what the population wants. And the population, I think they're probably not so different. People, they want AI to be good to them. They don't want to be monitored for everything that they do. They want to live in a free world. So I think also counting on the initiatives taken by the people is very important. So in the short term, I don't think that these countries will join the GPAI, frankly. But the door is not closed, and if they agree, if they adhere to the principles, as we say, then the future might be better than what you think.
ラジオットさんいかが
I
でしょう
don't think that I have anything to add to what Bertrand just said, which is, I think, right. It's really, I think, the filter of adhering to the principle of the OECD as they were presented by Mr. Ida initially. That really is the common ground and the common understanding around, a key principle in terms of key principles around, ethics and values in artificial intelligence. So, again, if these countries are willing to adhere to these principles, then I think we would have, created this common ground that could initiate the collaboration and cooperation. But maybe not on the short term, but I'm also filled with hope.
ありがとうございます。ラジオットさん、GPAI のアニュアルカンファレンス
Rajat
っていうのは、
Sang, I understand that there is an annual conference of GPAI, and I think, was it Canada that hosted
世
this?
界をもっと巻き込んでいくかっていう
How are you going to involve the world in the activities of GPAI? I think that is going to have an annual conference is important. What's the next schedule?
Yes, thank you very much for the opportunity of talking briefly about, the GPAI Montreal Summit 2020. It's actually the first meeting or gathering of all the participants to the Global Partnership on AI since it was created in June 2020. Initially, it was meant to be a physical meeting in Montreal. We would have been delighted to host the world for this first summit. But unfortunately, because of the current context of the COVID-19, the conference is going to take place virtually. The participants are obviously all the experts, the 150 experts that are currently a member of the working groups, the 5 working groups that Bertrand described initially. But we also decided to increase the number of participants by inviting an additional 60 to 70 experts from current member states, just to enlarge and bring additional new voices to the conversation that has taken place over the last 4 months. And we are currently, as we are developing the final version of the agenda and the program for the Global Summit, we are also considering how we can provide, access to external participants, maybe to pre-recorded, content or content on demand, so that they could start also getting a first sense of what has been accomplished in the first 4 months. And again, as Bertrand mentioned, we need to be modest in what we expect to accomplish in 4 months with such an ambitious, large organization. But there will be already, some initial analysis, conclusions, and recommendation, mostly providing orientation to the work of the GPAI for 2021 and 2022. So stay tuned. There will soon be a website for the GPAI that should be up and running, I would think probably the early November. And through that website, you will be able to get more details about the GPAI Montreal Summit, as well as how external individuals or organizations could participate or have access to some of the content of the GPAI Summit.
それではモントリオールで開かれる
So in Montreal, the the summit meeting is something to look forward to. As we are beset with the COVID-19 pandemic, it's important to consider AI and to involve the whole world. So we have high expectations for the Montreal summit meeting. Thank you very much. With that, we would like to bring this to a close.
様、ベルトラン・ブロンシュベグ様、飯田様、泉様、そして大田院、どうもありがとうございました。